29 years have now passed since the Notorious B.I.G. was ripped away from this world, and how devastating the life of his son, Christopher Wallace Jr., truly is. Before you scroll past thinking this is just another celebrity story about a lucky kid who inherited fame, stop right there, because what you are about to hear runs far deeper and darker than that. Because the moment most people hear the name C.J. Wallace, they instantly imagine a spoiled young man cruising through life on his father's untouchable legend, sliding past velvet ropes, living large, shielded from pain. And sure, there is a financial empire behind him. There is opportunity most people could never dream of. There is a name that opens doors instantly. But underneath every single one of those privileges sits a wound that no amount of money will ever heal. A truth that has quietly shaped every chapter of his existence since his first breath. What does it truly feel like to be raised as the son of one of the most legendary rappers to ever exist, knowing you were never given a chance to meet him? What kind of emotional toll does it take when the entire world feels connected to your father while you, his own blood, have nothing? That is the real unfiltered story we are exposing today. Yo, what's good, fam? Today we are cracking open the untold life of Christopher George Latore Wallace Jr., son of the Notorious B.I.G., holding nothing back. This one hits different, so stay locked in. Christopher Wallace Jr., known to the world as C.J. Wallace, entered this world on October 29, 1996, in New York City. His parents were none other than his father, Christopher George Latore Wallace, the Notorious B.I.G. Biggie Smalls himself, the self-declared king of New York, and his mother, the legendary R&B voice Faith Evans. On paper, being born into that bloodline looks like hitting the jackpot. Two music icons, a legacy already carved in gold before he could even speak. But here is where the story turns dark. CJ's father was gunned down in cold blood on March 9, 1997, only 4 months and 10 days after CJ came into this world. Biggie was just 24 years old. CJ was still a newborn. He would never build a single genuine memory of his own father, not one. No bedtime story, no laughter shared between them, no hand to hold, no voice calling his name. Nothing at all. And right there is where the true heartbreak of this story begins. Not through failure, not through poverty, but through an emptiness so complete and so permanent that no fortune, no fame, and no amount of time has ever been able to patch it up. Now let me be completely real with you before we go further. Because to understand what CJ's life has truly been, you first need to understand exactly who his father was, and why his shadow carries so much unbearable weight to this day. Christopher Wallace was born on May 21, 1972, in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, New York, to a Jamaican immigrant mother named Valletta Wallace. His upbringing was far from glamorous. As a teenager, he hustled the street corners of Bed-Stuy, was arrested repeatedly, and spent time behind bars. Yet through that brutal environment, the man possessed a gift for rhythm and language that felt almost supernatural. He built verses the way an architect raises skyscrapers, with breathtaking precision and scale. By the early 90s, a demo tape found its way into the hands of music mogul Sean Combs, then known as Puff Daddy, and everything shifted overnight. Biggie signed with Bad Boy Records, and in 1994 released his explosive debut album, Ready to Die. That record did not just make noise, it reshaped East Coast hip-hop forever. It was raw, cinematic, deeply confessional, and undeniably brilliant. Tracks like Juicy and Big Papa crossed straight into the mainstream, while the album's darker corners exposed an artist wrestling with death, addiction, and street life in a way that felt shockingly honest. Real talk, Biggie instantly became one of the most quoted, sampled, and studied rappers the genre has ever produced. His flow felt effortlessly smooth yet razor-sharp. His storytelling was cinematic, his presence magnetic even through a single speaker. And then everything spiraled when the East Coast-West Coast War ignited, a bitter cultural battle between Bad Boy Records in New York and Death Row Records in Los Angeles, with Big and Tupac Shakur caught directly in the crossfire. That feud escalated from lyrical shots on wax into something far more dangerous. Tupac was shot and killed in Las Vegas on September 13, 1996, barely 6 weeks before CJ was even born. Then on March 9th, 1997, just past midnight following the Soul Train Music Awards in Los Angeles, a dark Chevrolet Impala pulled up beside Biggie's GMC Suburban, and an unidentified gunman opened fire without warning. Christopher Wallace was struck 4 times and pronounced dead at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. He was only 24 years old. His second album, Life After Death, dropped just 16 days later and shot straight to #1. The whole world grieved publicly, loudly, endlessly. But the one who would pay the deepest, most permanent price for that loss was a 4-month-old infant who had no words yet to even process what had just been stolen from him. Now here is a part of this story that almost never gets told properly. In that brief window while Biggie was still alive and CJ was already in this world, those 4 months and 10 days, Biggie absolutely knew he had a son. He was present. According to Faith Evans and those closest to him, Biggie was proud of CJ's arrival and knew fatherhood would become one of the most important roles of his life. He had already lived that experience once before with his older daughter Tiana, and CJ's birth with Faith only deepened his sense of purpose and duty. People around Biggie in those final months describe a man who genuinely wanted to show up for his children, who spoke about giving them a different life than the one he clawed out of in Bed-Stuy. He was at the absolute peak of his commercial empire in late 1996, finishing Life After Death, running through promotional obligations, navigating the dangerously heated East-West rivalry, and somewhere buried inside all of that chaos, he was also a brand new father cradling a baby boy he would tragically never live to see take a single step. The cruelty of that timing is almost unbearable to process. CJ was simply too young to be preserved in memory, too young to form even one moment that could survive time. By the time he was old enough to grasp what a father meant, his was already gone. Immortalized through music, mourned by millions, yet permanently missing from every room CJ would ever grow up inside. Let's talk honestly about what it means to grow up fatherless when your father becomes a myth. Because CJ Wallace did not simply lose a parent, he grew up buried inside the shadow of a legend the entire world was obsessed with. Sit with that. Most children who lose a parent get to grieve somewhat privately, surrounded by loved ones who share real memories. CJ never had that luxury. His father was everywhere he turned. On the radio, inside documentaries, across magazine tributes painted on dorm room walls, printed on strangers' t-shirts, and every single anniversary of Biggie's death brought fresh coverage, new tributes, new interviews from people who often knew Biggie far longer and far more intimately than CJ himself ever could. Picture being a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, watching strangers break down crying over your father on national television. Imagine not even knowing whether to feel comforted or deeply unsettled by the fact that the entire world claims ownership over someone who never once had the chance to truly claim you as his son. That kind of emotional weight is not something therapy simply erases. It lives inside a person forever. CJ's mother, Faith Evans, instantly became both mother and father figure inside that household from day one. And let's be absolutely clear about who Faith Evans really is. Because she is not some background character in this story, she is the entire foundation of it. Faith Evans was already a rising, respected artist long before she married Biggie in 1994. She possessed a voice that could silence a room, a gift for melody that earned her real respect throughout the R&B world, and an inner strength she would need in ways she never imagined. After Biggie's murder, she had to process her own devastating grief while simultaneously raising CJ alongside his older half-sister Tiana, all while managing her own career and fighting to protect Christopher Wallace's legacy from an industry notorious for exploiting dead artists. CJ also grew up alongside his stepfather, Todd Rusaw, whom Faith later married, giving him some semblance of family stability inside a household shaped by public tragedy. Faith dropped her debut album Faith in 1998, only a year after Biggie's death, and it went platinum almost instantly. She kept grinding, kept performing, kept building, all while making certain her son understood where he came from and who his father truly was beyond the tabloid headlines. She she has spoken candidly about the immense challenge of helping CJ actually know Biggie, not merely as a legendary icon, but as a real man full of complexity, humor, love, and genuine flaws. That is some of the hardest, most emotionally exhausting parenting imaginable, and she carried it out while the entire world watched her every move. Now here is where the story takes a darker turn on the financial side, because yes, the empire and estate of the Notorious B.I.G. has exploded in value over time, and that reality is now permanently tied to CJ's life. At the moment of Biggie's death in 1997, his estate was worth a modest sum by celebrity standards, a few $1 million, coming mostly from music royalties and the commercial explosion of life after death. But across the following decades, that number exploded. Streaming platforms resurrected his entire catalog for brand new generations of listeners. Licensing deals pushed his music into films, commercials, and television. Biographical projects, merchandise lines, and tribute exhibitions opened up entirely new revenue streams. Music industry insiders now estimate Biggie's fortune at well over $100 million in recent years, with some projections climbing even higher once you factor in intellectual property, publishing rights, and brand licensing. Voletta Wallace, Biggie's mother, has remained fiercely protective over her son's estate, working alongside legal teams and family to guarantee his image and music are never exploited. CJ has grown steadily more involved in those decisions as he has gotten older. But here is something people desperately need to understand. Having access to wealth does not mean you are okay. It only means your material needs are covered. It does not mean the hole left behind by a missing father comes anywhere close to being filled. So let's talk about CJ himself, who he really is, what he has actually built, and where his life genuinely stands right now, because this is where the story gets truly compelling and far more complicated than most people realize. In 2009, when CJ was only 12 years old, he was cast in the biographical film Notorious, directed by George Tillman Jr. CJ did not just appear in the film, he played a young version of his own father. Let that sink in for a second. A 12-year-old boy who never knew his father, who grew up piecing together who Christopher Wallace was through old photographs and recordings, was suddenly forced to step in front of cameras and embody him on screen. That experience, by every account, was intensely emotional. He has spoken about what it felt like to inhabit his father's early life, to wear similar clothes, to stand inside recreations of places his father once stood, to speak words that echoed his father's voice. The film received mixed reviews but became a commercial success, introducing CJ to audiences across the globe while piling an even heavier weight of expectation onto his young shoulders. A year later, in 2010, CJ appeared in Everything Must Go, a drama starring Will Ferrell, stepping away from the direct connection to his family story and proving genuine range as an actor in his own right. Then in 2016, he appeared in the adventure film Kicks, quietly building an acting career that stood on its own terms. And in 2019, he landed a role playing Amir Alb in the third season of the VH1 slasher series Scream Resurrection, a 6-episode event that remains his only credited scripted television appearance. But here is what separates CJ from many celebrity children who simply coast on inherited fame. He made a deliberate choice not to become a rapper, a decision that deserves real respect because walking away from that path was never easy. The cultural pressure was enormous. You are the son of Biggie Smalls. Surely you are going to rap. CJ said no, not because he does not love hip-hop or honor his father's craft, but because he understood that trying to out-rap a ghost is a battle no one can win. That said, he has not stayed completely silent musically. In August 2020, CJ released Ready to Dance, a debut project of house and electronic tracks that reimagined his father's catalog without touching a single original sample or vocal. It was his own creative interpretation of Biggie's music, filtered through a different genre, introducing his father's catalog to new audiences while carving out a sound that belonged to him. He has also performed public tributes, including reciting his father's verse from One More Chance at a 2022 event celebrating what would have been Biggie's 50th birthday. These are not the moves of a man trying to become Biggie, but of a man figuring out how to become himself while staying rooted in where he came from. On the entrepreneurial side, CJ founded Think Big, a nonprofit built to provide educational resources to underserved youth in Brooklyn, with programming tied to music education and community empowerment that honors his father's influence. In 2019, he also launched BKTHC, a cannabis brand inspired by both his parents' creative energy, positioning it as a modern extension of hip-hop entrepreneurship while pushing for cannabis legalization and criminal justice reform. His cannabis work reveals a genuine awareness of how drug enforcement policies have devastated Black communities. The very communities that shaped his father and that Biggie's music captured with unflinching honesty. CJ has spoken openly about wanting to use his name and platform to confront those inequities rather than simply talking about them from a distance. In 2023, CJ stayed active across multiple fronts. He collaborated on the Frank White by Mitchell and Ness capsule collection marking the 30th anniversary of Ready to Die, Frank White being one of Biggie's most iconic alter egos borrowed from the Christopher Walken film King of New York, a collection that gave fans a fresh way to connect with Biggie's legacy instead of buying old merchandise. That same year, he contributed to a documentary produced by Time Studios exploring his father's life and lasting cultural impact, continuing his role as both guardian and interpreter of the Wallace legacy. Also in 2023, CJ appeared on the Paramount Plus show MTV's Family Legacy, sharing the screen with Christian King Combs, Quincy Brown, and Justin Combs, sons of Sean Combs, in a series exploring what it means to carry the names of music royalty into a new generation. That show alone could fuel its own documentary given everything that has since unfolded. Because here is where CJ's story suddenly takes a shocking turn nobody predicted, adding a disturbing new layer to the weight this man already carries. In July 2025, CJ Wallace was named as a defendant in an explosive civil lawsuit filed in Los Angeles Superior Court by an anonymous plaintiff identified only as John Doe. The lawsuit alleged that CJ had helped set up a 2020 encounter in which Sean Combs sexually assaulted the plaintiff at a Revolt TV location. The complaint claimed CJ acted as a participant in luring the man there under the false pretense of a business opportunity tied to Biggie's estate, specifically a house remix project of Ready to Die, only to deliver him straight into a situation where the assault allegedly took place. CJ and the other named defendants flatly denied every single allegation. His legal team branded the lawsuit a calculated smear campaign. Then in November 2025, CJ struck back, filing a federal defamation countersuit against the plaintiff's representative, Jonathan Hay, who had repeated and expanded on the claims in a viral YouTube video. CJ's attorney insisted the allegations were false, stating his client had suffered severe professional damage, humiliation, and mental anguish because of the accusations. The countersuit argues the original project, a Ready to Dance remix, was shelved after a single commercial flop, and that Hay fabricated the entire assault story out of retaliation for that business disappointment. As of now, the legal battle rages on and CJ continues to maintain his innocence. Let that context sink in. This is a man who grew up without his father, spent his adult life trying to build something meaningful with the name he inherited, and now finds himself trapped in a lawsuit tied directly to his father's music legacy and his father's former label head, Sean Combs. The very world Biggie built his career inside has now reached forward across nearly 3 decades and dragged CJ into his most damaging chapter yet. That is not simply sad. That is a specific, compounding cruelty most people who casually follow celebrity news will never fully appreciate. Now let me address something that gets constantly twisted whenever media covers CJ Wallace. There is a recurring habit in clickbait coverage of framing his life as either an unqualified tragedy or a feel-good triumph, depending on what the outlet needs that week. Neither frame is accurate. The truth is far messier and far more human than either extreme allows. CJ has built real things. Think Biggie is a genuine nonprofit with real programming reaching real kids across Brooklyn. BKTHC is a legitimate cannabis brand tied to authentic advocacy work. His acting career, while not prolific, spans more than 15 years across film and television. He has taken his father's name and used it to advocate for communities that desperately need advocacy, to spark conversations about mental health that this culture has historically avoided, and to modernize a legacy that could have easily collapsed into pure nostalgia. But here is the thing. none of that cancels out the emotional reality underneath. None of it makes him immune to the specific, unrelenting grief that comes from growing up in the absence of a parent, while that same parent remains one of the most publicly celebrated figures in American music history. When your last name is Wallace and your father is Biggie Smalls, your identity gets assigned by the culture before you ever get a chance to define yourself. Every interview, every business venture, every public appearance gets filtered through the lens of Big Son before it ever gets judged on its own terms. That is an exhausting way to move through public life, and it is a weight CJ Wallace has carried every single day without complaint. Those two truths, his real achievements and his real grief, exist simultaneously, and they always will. Here is where the real gut punch lands. After 29 years, after the streaming numbers, the estate valuations, the business ventures, the film roles, the music projects, and now a scandalous lawsuit tied to the very legacy he has spent his entire life protecting, the fundamental emotional fact of CJ Wallace's life remains completely unchanged. His father was 24 years old when he was murdered. CJ is now older than his father ever lived to be. He has now outlived his own father in years while never once being able to share that milestone with him. He has moved through stages of life that Biggie never lived to witness. He has carried accomplishments and struggles his father will never know about. Christopher Wallace Sr. missed his son's first words. He missed his first day of school. He missed CJ standing in front of a film camera for the first time and playing him on screen. He missed the music CJ made in his honor. He missed every hard moment and every proud one. Not by choice, but by sudden violence, by the kind of senseless tragedy that offers no closure and gives nothing back. And that, fam, is exactly where the sadness in this story lives. Not in a bank account balance or a career setback or a shocking lawsuit headline. It lives inside every milestone of CJ Wallace's life that his father never got to witness. Biggie never got to teach CJ a single thing. He never got to embarrass him at the dinner table, or push him through a setback, or argue with him over a bad decision, or beam with pride watching something his son built entirely from scratch. He never got to sit courtside at an event celebrating his own legacy and nudge his son beside him. He never got to watch CJ step onto a film set for the first time and feel the complicated emotion of watching his own blood carry his story forward. He never got to hear Ready to Dance playing through a speaker and know his son had found his own creative voice. None of it. Everything CJ knows about his father came secondhand. Through his mother Faith, through his grandmother Valletta, through interviews, documentaries, and songs, through memories shared by people who loved Christopher Wallace and are still fighting to keep him alive through their work. CJ has had to piece together a father entirely out of fragments, photographs, recordings, and other people's stories, and then carry the enormous legend those fragments create, while a watching world keeps assigning him responsibilities he never once asked for. 29 years since that dark-colored Impala pulled up beside a black Suburban on Wilshire Boulevard and violently changed the course of hip-hop history forever. 29 years since Valletta Wallace received the call no mother should ever have to receive. 29 years since Faith Evans suddenly became a single mother to a 4-month-old boy who would grow up carrying a name the world would never let rest. And across those 29 years, Christopher Wallace Jr. has grown from that helpless infant into a full-grown man. A man who has chosen purpose over spectacle, who has made music, built businesses, appeared on screen, advocated for justice, honored his father publicly through tributes and business decisions and creative projects alike, and who now fights inside federal court to defend his own name and reputation against allegations he insists are completely false. He has done all of this while never truly escaping the one absence that defines his entire story more than any headline or achievement ever could. His father is not here. He was never here in any way CJ could actually hold on to. And no matter how massive the estate grows, no matter how many tribute events fill arenas across Brooklyn, no matter how many streaming platforms carry Biggie's voice into the ears of a brand new generation, that specific permanent loss belongs to CJ Wallace and CJ Wallace alone, and it always will. That is the real story here, not the clickbait version, not some convenient redemption arc. Behind the legend, behind the estate, behind the business ventures and the lawsuits and the anniversary tributes, There is simply a son who just wanted his father, and a father who will never get to know the extraordinary man his son became. So here is the real question worth sitting with. If you had grown up carrying a legend's name without ever once hearing his voice call yours, what would you have done with that weight? Drop your honest answer below, because this is exactly the kind of story that deserves to be talked about, not just watched and scrolled past.